At 2:30 p.m. over the South China Sea, a U.S. Navy helicopter pushed into contested airspace, instantly triggering alarms in Beijing. Within minutes, China scrambled its top attack helicopter to intercept, determined to send a message. What followed was 72 minutes of tense maneuvering that could have spiraled into disaster. The Chinese pilot thought intimidation would be enough, but instead, he made a mistake that exposed weaknesses Beijing never wanted revealed. This is how China challenged a U.S. helicopter and paid the price. On a calm afternoon over the South China Sea, around 14:30 local time, a dramatic standoff began. A U.S. Navy MH-60 Romeo helicopter was carrying out anti-submarine surveillance in what's considered international airspace, and this was roughly 50 nautical miles from Chinese territorial limits. The mission: track a Chinese Type 039 diesel submarine, which had been submerged for 48 hours and needed to surface eventually to recharge its batteries. China, on the other hand, responded aggressively. About 28 minutes earlier, Beijing had scrambled a Z-10 attack helicopter with orders that were loosely interpreted as "drive off the Americans." The Z-10 pilot, likely under pressure to show force, maneuvered across Romeo's nose at just about 500 meters separation. But in doing so, he was in international airspace, and so the U.S. crew had legal rights to be there. What the Chinese pilot didn't know was that Romeo wasn't a passive target. It was equipped with an ALQ-210 electronic support measures pod, which actively collected electronic emissions like radar signatures, communication signals, and even rotor harmonics from nearby platforms. This allowed the U.S. crew to silently spy on the Chinese and listen in to what they were saying without revealing much of their own position. To scare the American helicopter off, the Chinese pilot attempted theatrical escalation by using two flares, tight banking maneuvers, and visible aggression. But this backfired in a way that he didn't expect. The submarine he was actually protecting was still being tracked by U.S. sonar, and in a panicked emergency dive, it generated vast acoustic noise that was heard by the entire U.S. carrier strike group. In submarine warfare, noise is lethal, and the Chinese side just undermined its own stealth. After about 18 minutes of failed intimidation, the Z-10 pilot finally locked his fire control radar onto the Romeo. But just 3 seconds later, the game was over. A nearby EA-18G Growler radioed in, unleashing a burst of electromagnetic energy. These Chinese radar displays immediately turned into a ghastly hall of mirrors with multiple phantom targets, false contacts, and an image appearing inside the pilot's own cockpit. From that point forward, the Chinese pilot was under a kind of electronic siege. The US EW systems hopped frequencies faster than the Z-10's radar could adapt. The Romeo seemed to have split into dozens of contacts, and the Chinese radar essentially hallucinated. Meanwhile, the U.S. carrier strike group radars and Super Hornets activated, lighting up the Chinese helicopter like a target on a range. There was no escape, no stealth, and no surprise, with every system being outmatched. Instead of retreating, the Z-10 pilot tried desperate theatrics and aggressive close maneuvers. He closed to about 500 meters to force the Romeo into a bad firing position with sudden maneuvering, even hoping that the inertia or aerodynamic quirks would give him an edge. But the Romeo, which is built on a Black Hawk-derived frame, handled high G-loads much better. The Chinese pilot was pushing his aircraft to its limits and beyond. While all this was happening, Romeo's sensors were quietly recording everything. Its missile warning system, FLIR/infrared cameras, and ESM systems logged the turn rates, climb performance, rotor harmonic signatures, engine heat, and many other parameters. So, as the Chinese pilot was still trying to intimidate the US, it was unwittingly handing the US a detailed blueprint of how to detect, jam, and eventually destroy his helicopter type in future engagements. The standoff dragged past 72 minutes as the Chinese pilot was worn out. His airframe was overheated, hydraulic systems were strained, and the controls became sluggish, all of which are symptoms of sustained overexertion. After this, the Romeo resumed its dipping sonar pass over the submarine. China had failed, not only tactically, but strategically. The encounter ended with America having harvested a trove of electronic and thermal intelligence, likely compromising the entire generation of Z-10 helicopters. After this happened, the Chinese state media released a video of their Z-10 attack helicopter intercepting the MH-60 Romeo, and they revealed that this was near the Taiwan Strait. China claimed that the U.S. aircraft had approached Chinese airspace and described the U.S. maneuvers as extremely professional. According to the Chinese pilot, identified as Kong Xianghui, claimed that the foreign helicopter had approached within about 3 miles of waters claimed by China, and that during the standoff it vanished into cloud over before reappearing and closing to about 500 meters before turning away. The Chinese state media also framed the encounter as a successful expulsion of the foreign rotorcraft from its maritime boundary, even praising the PLA's vigilance and readiness. But the world is still waiting to see the official statement from the U.S. Defense Department. The timing of this conflict between China and the U.S. came at the strangest time, on August 1st, which was the anniversary of the founding of China's People Liberation Army. Some suspect that it had a symbolic or political message component, and that the U.S. was trying to signal something to the Chinese and international audiences. But this isn't the first time that China has used helicopters to block other aerial interceptions near its claimed maritime zones, especially around Taiwan and in the East China Sea. In fact, in May 2025, the Chinese state media reported 11 helicopter encounters in 10 days over the East China Sea. The foreign aircraft approached near China's coastline, prompting PLA helicopters like Z-10 and Z-19 to take off. Also, in the South China Sea, in February 2025, a Chinese helicopter Z-9 flew close to a Philippine surveillance aircraft over Scarborough Shoal. The Philippines lodged a formal protest against China after this, worsening the relationship between the countries. Taiwan has also revealed that there have been many fixed-wing aircrafts and helicopters crossing the median line into Taiwan's ADIZ, or flying near Taiwan's coast. China's actions have worsened the relationship between the different countries. Most of these aircraft conflicts are because of the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea, which China claims belongs to its own country. Of course, neighboring countries and international actors don't agree with this. But China constantly defends this region, so any aircraft that goes close to that territory, like America's Romeo, is met with aggression. The incident underscores the persistent legal and strategic disagreement between Washington and Beijing over jurisdiction in the Taiwan Strait. To the U.S., the strait is in international waters and open to navigation and overflight under international law. But to China, there are broader maritime claims, and it focuses on stricter control over foreign military presence near its coast. Near Taiwan, there are also frequent alerts of PLA aircraft, including helicopters, flying near or in Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ, over or near the so-called median line of the Taiwan Strait. Some of these encounters between Chinese helicopters and other aircrafts are reported to be very close as 10 meters in some East China Sea interceptions. In a few cases, helicopters are approaching reconnaissance or surveillance aircraft very closely, sometimes in conditions of low visibility. Some helicopters have been used even by the People's Liberation Army Ground Forces Aviation Corps for maritime and overwater interceptions when close enough to shore. But the main problem that's causing China, the US, and other countries to constantly clash is the conflicting views. China and the US don't agree on issues like what is international airspace, what is a country's territorial or claimed maritime zone, what is allowed in ADIZ, and more. So, when the US approaches the so-called Chinese territory with a helicopter, they think they're in international airspace, while China thinks they are encroaching. There are different reasons why China is increasing its helicopter or aerial interceptions near its claimed zones. The main reason why China is so quick to detail the US helicopter is for deterrence and signaling. They are trying to show readiness to respond to what it views as foreign military presence near China's coast. Basically, China wants to show that they have full control over its claimed maritime zones. China has also made it normal to have these coercive and aggressive posture against other countries that come close to them. This is called gray zone tactics, which are actions that don't cause conflict but also shift the status quo or asset claims. China might be using this as a method to spy on other countries and gain more experience. Although, in the recent confrontation between the American MH-60 Romeo and the Chinese Z-10, it was the US that got the upper hand. It was clear that China also wanted to learn America's interception protocols, command and control, communication, and rules of engagement. China is now more willing to deploy attack helicopters in maritime contexts, showing how much its airspace equipment has advanced. But for the US, China is just being provocative, and these encounters pose risks of miscalculation, escalation, or accidents. Whenever they have close encounters, it causes engagement that can easily worsen the situation. Although these tactics bring some advantages for China, analysts have pointed out some concerns. If China continues these close encounters with American helicopters and aircrafts from other countries, especially under cloud cover or low visibility, it can increase the risk of miscalculation. If the foreign aircraft responds aggressively, it can cause a collision or unintended confrontation between China and other countries. There is also debate about whether China's behavior violates international norms or agreements like UNCLOS and customary norms of overflight. These incidents test how much countries are willing to tolerate actions that may be provocative or aggressive, but do not necessarily cross clear legal thresholds. Other states like the US, Philippines, Japan, and Taiwan are more and more unhappy with China and are protesting against the country, especially when their aircraft are approached too closely. These incidents are straining relationships between the different countries. There's a good chance that if China derails another helicopter, especially one from the US, it can lead to heightened tensions and risk. More incidents can cumulatively increase the chance of a serious accident or unintended clash, which could escalate. Although China has some pretty impressive aircraft technology, Taiwan and other neighboring countries might also try to up their game. When China and the US faced each other in the international skies, it caused a back-and-forth conflict that lasted over an hour. What do you think would happen the next time they meet again? Let's know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on global military events.